Hello YouTube, it's Mr. Magz here. And I know in a recent video I said that there weren't really any more of those stupid Nintendo articles for me to analyze. But it turns out that CheatCC.com is back at it again. Now, I've actually done quite a number of videos on this particular website. Just for some reason, I have found so many times that they write these dumb articles specifically about Nintendo, yet they never seem to know what they're talking about. Like, this honestly might be the most confusing article I have ever read in this series. I, like, there have been some articles that I probably have read that I just didn't feel like doing just because they were so weird. I just feel like I wasn't capable of really analyzing them. But this one, it so the title of the article is "Could the Switch Bubble Burst Soon?" And you know what? That's actually a kind of valid point. There are many things about the system that could potentially stop it from selling as well as it is right now in the near future. Because, yes, it is selling amazingly right now, especially in Japan, but there are just a couple of things here and there that if Nintendo doesn't, you know, fix soon, or at least acknowledge soon, it could cause some problems. Such as the fact that some people are already kind of, well, not fans of the system, but people on the outside looking in, they're not super, like, into the whole handheld take on the go gimmick yet. Some people, feel the online isn't quite there yet, and yeah, they're gonna fix that soon, supposedly. No virtual console, a slight lack of third-party games, but overall, I feel like Nintendo is doing a pretty decent job right now to show that yeah, this system is here to stay, and we will continue to make it sell well in the future. And this article is asking the question, like, how does this particular writer feel the Switch could burst? And he doesn't exactly go about it in any of the ways I just said. Let me start reading and you might find out what I'm talking about. I have a concern, perhaps let's call it a worry, about the Nintendo Switch. It's a great console, it really is. And there's proof enough of that in the insane rush to get content on the thing that started late 2017 and will assuredly run through 2018. This excitement from developers and publishers is especially tangible in the indie realm, where game after game has reportedly performed so much better on the Switch than on any other platform. Okay, yes, Nintendo has had amazing indie support with the Switch. Nintendo has always had pretty decent indie support when it came to the Wii U and 3DS, but for some reason, just this system in particular just had so much indie support right out of the gate. And like he said, all these developers are coming out saying they feel their games are doing so much better on the Nintendo Switch than everywhere else. Just recently, I think Blossom Blast, crap, I can't remember the name of the game, but like Blossom something doubled the sales of the Steam counterpart, and it came out just a couple weeks ago. That's insane. So just one more game that came out recently that's already outsold its other versions. So yeah, having great indie support is a big deal for this platform. It's in this camp where my concerns lie. So you're concerned about the indie support. Okay, let's see where this goes. During year one, games had great discoverability by default, but for year two and onward, I fear that as things are now, the Switch may soon find itself teetering the same line as competition does, ultimately resulting in similar troubles, even if on a smaller scale. So, the point of an intro paragraph is to present your ideas in a kind of summarized form so that they can be expanded upon in future subsequent paragraphs. All I got out of this is that essentially this writer is afraid that indies might not get as much representation on the platform if more games come out. Which, couple of things wrong with that. First, for the sake of this article, how does indie support alone signify the Nintendo Switch bubble bursting? There are many other games coming out for the system, both first and third party. Amazing games, mind you. So if the indie support either dials back a little bit or doesn't necessarily get the representation that they are right now, it's not going to be that big of a deal, at least in my humble opinion. And two, I don't really feel like more games is a bad thing. Because just by the way it's saying here, he's saying that the entire reason why the Switch will burst is because indies are not going to get enough sales, but and the reason why they're not going to get enough sales is because they are being overshadowed by a lot of other games on the system. That just doesn't really make sense to me. But let's keep reading. Maybe he expands on it in a good way. He doesn't. Let's just humor him for a second. The problems I'm taking about have taken serious root on what used to be bankable territory, namely on PlayStation 4 and Steam. I doubt I need to introduce the idea that it's hard to find good games on either platform anymore that don't already come with pre-baked AAA marketing in tow. There's just too much content and not enough quality control. Small games aren't getting the mindshare they need, and that's partly because so many new games are coming out every day, everything gets buried in the pile. Okay, so I kind of get what you're saying. Kind of late into the 3DS and Wii U's lifespan, those eShops were kind of flooded with a bunch of garbage games. Just shovelware titles just thrown out there at the last second, just I don't know why. Like there was really no quality control in the last couple of years of both of those systems. And I think here he's essentially saying he doesn't want that to happen to the Switch. And sure, that's fine. The only problem with your argument is Nintendo has had two separate Nindies Spotlight events, spotlighting all of the current and future indie games coming and are on the Switch. And you really don't think they're going to continue this trend? Like I don't know, every 5 or 6 months or so, like have another Nindies Direct? Because I think the first one was in March and the second one was in I think early September. So yeah, 4 or 5 months in between, we could get one as early as February or even March again. I don't really feel like people won't know about the good games because Nintendo seems pretty good about telling people about the great indie support they have. They even coined the phrase Nindies because of all the great indies coming. So, yeah, I personally don't really feel like you can compare just, point for point. You can't really compare the PlayStation 4 and Steam to the Switch because Nintendo kind of seems to care a little bit more about the indie scene. Like I said, going as far as to coin the phrase Nindies in their presentations. So I'll continue. With a Nintendo Switch, that hasn't become an issue yet. Despite lots of new games coming out, Nintendo still sends out the weekly releases in emails and press to press and fans. And the volume just isn't that bad yet, but it could be. A lot of the problem lies in the current bare bones design of the Nintendo eShop as it appears on the Switch. Nintendo has generally struggled with this, but even the Wii U and 3DS eShops are more thoroughly organized than the Switches. It's a mess. And I'll give them that. The Switch's eShop, it could be better. It has the you can search for games feature, it has new releases, and it has top selling, and maybe like a discounted category. So would it be better if it had like action, platformer, puzzle, like those like individual like categories of games? Yeah, it would be. I'll admit, but like I said before, Nintendo seems pretty good about showcasing the good games coming. So more than likely, if you're going to the eShop, you're going there for a purpose. You're going there to get a game. So you go to the eShop, type in the game or go to the newest release and just find the game you want and buy it. I don't personally really feel like it's such a big deal right now that Nintendo doesn't necessarily have the best eShop, especially since we're not paying for anything yet. I have high hopes that once Nintendo actually starts making you pay for online stuff, they'll restructure a lot of their online stuff. At least that's my hope. If we're paying for it, they'd better deliver. And yeah, once there are a lot more games on the system, it would be nice to actually have those categories. When you log onto the eShop, everything is just a big pile. There's no genres, categories, or anything really. You can look at the top sellers, which is fine for games you probably already know about. Or you can, to Nintendo's credit, look at what's on sale. Although you probably already know about those games too, and that option wasn't even available until later. So, two things about that sentence. One, I'm not really sure if people just know about games that are on sale. They don't generally have like Nintendo YouTube channels or tweets out about stuff like that. I know they did for FIFA, but that's because like that's a big third party game that like didn't sell that well on the Switch. So they thought, okay, let's push this game just one last time. But another thing he said, and that option wasn't even available until later, like that was a knock to it. So you're saying essentially what you're saying there is that it's a knock that it wasn't there to begin with, yet you still want it to evolve in the future. So if it does evolve in the future, are you going to complain that it wasn't there at launch, even though what you want is there now? That just kind of seems like a contradiction. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too into that. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but that's just kind of what it feels like to me. A big list of everything that has come out in chronological order just isn't good, especially when you have a fat stack of Nindies dropping almost every week. And again, it does have the top selling ones, so more than likely those are the games you're going to want to buy because that's what everyone wants to buy. And if you are on the system looking for a specific game, you can just type it in. Like I said, I'm not saying that the eShop is perfect by any means. I would much prefer to have like categories and groupings and stuff. But right now, it's not the biggest deal. I'm not going to assume a solution is simple because that's ridiculous. I am going to assume that plans are in the works for later iterations on the eShop, as it's pretty clear that, along with everything else, this software came out earlier than originally planned. Nintendo was likely focused on the actual games along with the Nintendo Switch Online service that has been delayed multiple times already. I'm not sure about multiple. I know it was delayed out of 2017 without an actual release date. So I can't really say it's been delayed multiple times. It was just never given a release date, and then they decide, oh, it's not actually going to be in 2017. So at least maybe delayed once out of 2017, but whatever. Perhaps a new infrastructure is in the works. for when that launches, since it will bring with it more functions, such as the classic games library. That will need to live somewhere after all. And yeah, like I said before, I'm pretty sure once Nintendo does start making us pay $20 a year for the online service, that they're gonna do some restructuring to the eShop. Especially yeah, once the NES and SNES and all those classic games come out, they're gonna want to have a separate virtual console like category for those. At least that's what I'm hoping, so that Nindies do have more room to shine. Just keep those separate from the actual Nintendo Virtual Console stuff. Whatever happens, it's still worth noting that Nintendo has done a lot for smaller games. It isn't perfect, but the other big publishers hardly bother even putting out marketing materials for indies and other non-AAA titles. Meanwhile, Nintendo does Nindy Showcase streams and includes these games in its Nintendo Direct events as well. Even though a lot of it is tied into marketing and exclusive deals, that's still more lip service than you see elsewhere. Okay, so you actually did bring up the Nindies Showcase. So what exactly is your problem? So far, this entire article just kind of seems like you're complaining for absolutely no reason. Because you you mentioned that this is the problem, even though it's not really. You mentioned it's a problem. Then you said you gave reasons you gave ways they could fix it, and you also acknowledged that they have been kind of fixing it some like as we went with the sales option. So I don't really understand what exactly your problem is. And I still don't understand why this article is titled "Could the Nintendo Switch Bubble Pop?" I don't understand that title, and I get it. It's just a clickbait title. That's what this website does. CheatCC.com would not exist without these clickbaity titles, and uh, so that's probably just what it was. They didn't want to, like, it would have been easier, would have been pretty much the overall same outcome if he had just titled it the Nintendo Switch Indie Problem or something like that. It's still kind of clickbaity. It gets your point across way better. It actually ties into your article better. But so far, it just kind of seems like you're complaining about stuff for no reason. Whatever. I'll just continue. And for some reason, this paragraph right here is a copy paste of this paragraph. So yeah, I'm not going to bother reading this paragraph here. I'm not saying the Switch is going to turn into a disaster after a big breakout first year, but this is a worry in the back of my head. Whenever something does well or succeeds lately, it feels like everyone swarms in it at once. We've seen a lot of Me Too games do poorly on the individual level, and I'm increasingly wary of curation or lack thereof on game platforms that are run more by flawed algorithms than people. But we'll see how it goes. There's plenty of time ahead for the Switch, and plenty of time to make it better. But there's just as much time for things to go sour, and hopefully the game developers won't get the worst of it in that case. I I don't you it really feels like this guy is just turning this one problem into something way bigger than it should be. I'm not saying the Nintendo Switch is going to turn into a disaster, but as a worry in the back of my head, you're worrying that the Switch is getting too many indie games. That's essentially what this boils down to. He's afraid that as Nintendo Switch gets more and more indie games or games in general, that certain games are not going to get as much representation. And that's a fine concern to have, I guess. The only problem is having more games is never a bad thing. Showing overwhelming support for the indie games, for the developers of the future, essentially, is not a bad thing. Indies, Nintendo fans are the ones who generally cling to indies because they make games that appeal to Nintendo fans. Like a lot of fans would have loved to have Nintendo fans would have loved to have Cuphead on their system because they love the art style and they love the gameplay, but because that's Microsoft exclusive, they couldn't have it. But I don't understand what exactly this guy's problem with the Nintendo Switch is. Because he didn't mention anything about the hardware itself. He didn't mention anything about first party content. He didn't mention anything about, future third party games or anything. He focused simply on this indie problem, in quotations, of his fear that there's gonna eventually be too many indie games and Nintendo's not gonna be able to showcase them all effectively, even though he said multiple times that through emails and Nintendo Directs and other avenues that Nintendo seems to showcase these indie games fairly, fairly decently. So yeah, I don't really understand why this article was even made, especially with that title, like I've already said. Uh, like I said, if you did complain more about just stuff that actually makes sense, that actually could make the proverbial Switch bubble pop, that could be something. But no, he focused solely on the fact that indie games, which aren't really that big of a deal, like they don't essentially indie games don't make or break a system. They certainly help, and they might hurt if you don't get certain indie games or you don't get indie games at all. But having too many indie games is never going to be a problem. It might be a problem for certain developers if their games do so just so happen to get looked over, but more than likely Nintendo will showcase this game heavily before a Me Too type game or like a clone type game will come out for it. So yeah, I think I'm done with this article. Um, Leave comments down below. What do you guys think of this article? Do you think that the Switch bubble might burst soon? Do you think indies will have anything to do with that if that were to happen? Which honestly, I don't really see the Nintendo Switch popping anytime soon. Do I see it selling another 10 million next year? It depends. Honestly, it all depends on if Pokemon comes out next year. I could easily see it cracking over 8 million, easily. Like by the following March, selling well over 20 million. Um, so yeah, I'll leave comments down below. I'd like to have a discussion going, and see ya.